At 43, I learned that the people who raised me had been keeping a secret so dangerous, they wrapped it in brown paper and left it on my doorstep instead of saying it out loud. But what I discovered 3 days later changed everything. My name is Margaret Doyle, though everyone has called me Maggie since I was 6 years old and too small to answer to anything longer. I live in Boone, North Carolina, in a house with green shutters and a porch swing that still creaks on the same fourth board it always has. For 22 years, I worked as an emergency room nurse at Watauga Medical Center, the kind of job where you learn to keep your hands steady even when your heart is not. I retired 2 years ago, not because I wanted to, but because my husband Daniel got sick, and there are some things you cannot do from a hospital break room. I held his hand through 11 months of chemotherapy, through the good days when he still made jokes about his own bald head, and through the last week when he stopped making jokes at all. He passed on a Tuesday in October, with rain against the window and my hand in his. I do not tell people that story for sympathy. I tell it because it explains something important about me. I have already survived the worst thing I thought could happen to me. That matters later. After Daniel died, my life became quiet in the way a house becomes quiet after a party ends. Not empty exactly, just settled. I filled my mornings with coffee on the porch and my afternoons with the garden Daniel and I planted together, tomatoes and marigolds in crooked rows because neither of us had ever been good with a level. I saw my parents, Walter and Louise Hartley, most Sundays. They live 40 minutes away in Blowing Rock, in the same brick house I grew up in, the one with the chipped mailbox post and the hydrangea bush my mother has fussed over since before I could walk. My father worked 31 years for the county road department. My mother taught second grade until her knees gave out. They are the kind of people who clip coupons out of habit rather than need, who keep the thermostat at 66 in winter because that is what they have always done, who say grace before every meal even when it is just crackers and soup. Daniel used to tease me, gently, about how I ran toward emergencies instead of away from them. "You've got ice water in your veins when everyone else has panic," he told me once, early in our marriage, after I'd calmly talked a stranger through CPR instructions over the phone while dinner burned on the stove behind me. I used to think that was just something that happened to me at work, a switch I could flip on and off with my scrubs. I did not yet understand that it was simply who I was in every room, in every kitchen, in every hallway that mattered. That steadiness would matter more than I could have guessed, sitting at my own kitchen table on an ordinary Saturday morning that was about to stop being ordinary at all. I was the good daughter. I do not say that with pride, only with honesty, because it is the truth that sets up everything else. When my father had his heart scare 4 years ago, I was the one who drove him to Winston-Salem for the surgery and slept in a vinyl chair beside his bed for 3 nights. When my mother's hips started giving her trouble, I was the one who found her the right doctor, who sat through the appointments, who translated the medical jargon into plain English she could actually use. My brother Craig lives in Charlotte, 2 hours away, with his wife Denise and their 2 teenagers. Craig calls our parents on holidays. He sends a card on their anniversary. He has always been the son who shows up for the photographs and disappears before the dishes need washing. I never resented him for it, not really. I told myself that families divide labor the way they divide anything else, that some people give time and some people give distance, and that both were forms of love if you looked at them generously enough. I was wrong about that, but it would take a wrapped box on my doorstep to teach me, so that IT was a Thursday evening in late September when I found it. I had just come in from watering the tomatoes, and there it sat on the top step, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with kitchen twine, the kind my mother keeps in a drawer for exactly this purpose. Taped to the top was a note in my mother's careful cursive, the same handwriting that used to sign my school permission slips. It said only this: "Maggie, do not open until Sunday. Please trust us. We love you, Mom and Dad." No explanation. No birthday, no holiday, nothing on the calendar that would call for a gift. Just an instruction, wrapped in the kind of gentle authority parents never quite lose over their children, no matter how old those children get. I carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table, and for 2 days I mostly managed to ignore it. I want to be honest, though, it needled me the way an unanswered question always does. My mother is not a woman who does things without reason, and my father has never once left a mystery lying around a house without meaning something specific by it. On Friday night, I sat across from that box while I ate a bowl of soup alone, and I noticed something. It was heavier than a card or a trinket, and along one seam, the twine had already begun to fray, as though it had been tied and untied more than once, as though someone's hands had hesitated before finally deciding to leave it. I called my mother Friday evening, just to hear her voice, just to see if I could read anything in it. She sounded tired in a way I recognized from the years Daniel was sick, a tiredness that lives underneath the words instead of in them. "Everything all right, Mom?" I asked her. "Fine, sweetheart," she said. "We'll talk Sunday." There was a pause on the line, half a second too long, and then she added, "I love you, you know that." It was the kind of thing mothers say all the time and mean nothing unusual by it, but something in her voice made the hair on my arms rise, and I have spent enough years reading vital signs on a monitor to know when something underneath looks calmer than what is actually happening. I did not make it to Sunday. Saturday morning, alone in my kitchen with coffee going cold beside me, I cut the twine. Inside was not a gift. It was a manila folder, thick with paper, and on top of it a small digital voice recorder, the kind you can buy for $20 at any drugstore. Beneath the recorder were photocopied bank statements, a stack of pill organizer printouts from a pharmacy in Charlotte, and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a durable power of attorney form, drafted only 6 weeks earlier, naming my brother Craig as sole decision-maker over my parents' finances and medical care. My name was nowhere on it. Beneath that was something that made my stomach drop the way it used to drop when a trauma call came in during a quiet shift, a printed brochure for a memory care facility outside Charlotte, with my mother's name already handwritten in the intake field, dated for a tour appointment 3 weeks out. My hands were shaking by the time I pressed play on the recorder. The first voice was my mother's, low and careful, clearly recording in secret, maybe from a bathroom or a car. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," she said, "but if something happens to us, I need someone besides Craig to know what's been going on." Then came another voice, one I recognized instantly and wished I did not. Denise, my brother's wife, brisk and businesslike in a way that turned my blood cold. "The Ambien needs to go in her tea, not the water. She can taste it in water." Then Craig's voice, quieter, almost apologetic, but present, complicit. "Just until the POA clears. Then we don't need to do any of this anymore." My mother's voice again, thinner now, frightened. "I don't like feeling foggy all the time. I don't like not remembering things." And Denise, flat as a closed door. "It's temporary, Louise. Once everything's settled, you'll feel like yourself again." I sat perfectly still at my kitchen table for what felt like a very long time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher in the same calm, clinical voice I once used to call out vitals during a code that I believed my elderly parents were being drugged and manipulated into signing over legal control of their affairs, and that I needed a welfare check done immediately at their home in Blowing Rock. I gave the address. I gave my parents' names. I did not cry until after I hung up, and even then I let myself have exactly 2 minutes of it before I picked my keys up off the counter. The drive to Blowing Rock has never felt longer. I remember every mile marker, every turn, the way the mountains looked flat and gray under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. I called my father's cell phone 4 times and got no answer. I told myself that meant nothing. I did not believe it. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, even as my mind ran through every worst version of what I might find, the way it used to run through triage possibilities on a bad night shift. I had learned a long time ago that panic is a luxury you cannot afford in the moment that requires you most. So I drove and I breathed, and I kept my foot even on the gas pedal, and I did not let myself imagine my mother's face until I had something real to attach it to. By the time I arrived, there was a patrol car already in the driveway, lights off, parked at an angle that told me the officer had gotten there in a hurry despite the lack of sirens. My mother was sitting on the front porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, and the relief that moved through me at the sight of her upright and breathing nearly buckled my knees. My father stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, his face the particular gray of a man who has just realized how close to the edge of something he has been standing without knowing it. The officer, a younger man named Deputy Ransom, met me at the steps. "Ma'am, your mother's a little disoriented, some slurred speech. We've got EMS en route just to check her out as a precaution. She mentioned something about medication in her tea." I told him everything, the recorder, the folder, the pharmacy printouts. He asked to see the recorder, and I gave it to him without hesitation. Some secrets, once you find them, are not yours to protect anymore. My mother reached for my hand as I sat down beside her. "I didn't know how else to tell you," she whispered. "I was scared if I said it out loud, someone would hear." Her eyes were glassy, unfocused in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with what had been slipped into her tea for who knows how many weeks. "I didn't want you to think I was losing my mind," she said. "I thought if I just left you proof, you'd believe me even if I couldn't explain it right." I told her I believed her completely, and I meant it with everything I had. EMS checked my mother's vitals and found elevated levels consistent with sedative use, exactly as the recording suggested. She was transported to the hospital as a precaution, and I rode in the front of my own car behind the ambulance with my father, who talked the entire way in the broken, run-on way people talk when they are trying to outrun panic. He told me Craig had been visiting more often over the past 2 months, always with Denise, always with paperwork tucked into a folder that he described as just some updating, Dad nothing to worry about. He told me Craig had gently, persistently, suggested that Mom's memory wasn't what it used to be, that maybe it was time to think about their care differently, that he only wanted to help. My father, a man who had spent 31 years reading road conditions and knowing exactly when pavement was about to buckle beneath a truck, admitted he hadn't seen the ground shifting beneath his own family at the hospital. While my mother was being monitored, Adult Protective Services arrived to take a statement, alongside a detective from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, since that was where Craig and Denise lived and where the pharmacy on the printouts was located. I sat in a molded plastic chair in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, a hallway I had walked 1,000 times in my career. Except this time I was not the nurse. I was the daughter. The detective, a composed woman named Detective Ibarra, asked me detailed questions about the recorder, the power of attorney document, the timeline. I answered everything precisely, the way I'd been trained to give a report during a shift change. Precision, I have learned, is its own kind of strength. Hysteria gets you sympathy. Precision gets you justice. Somewhere in the middle of that hallway conversation, I realized something that steadied me even further. 22 years of documenting incidents, of writing statements that would later be read by lawyers and administrators and sometimes juries, had prepared me for exactly this moment without my ever knowing it was coming. I asked Detective Ibarra for copies of everything filed. I asked which forms I needed to formally request my mother's pharmacy records be preserved, and I asked calmly whether a civil attorney would need anything different from what a criminal case would require. She looked at me for a moment, the way people look at you when they expect grief and get competence instead, and said, "You've done this before, haven't you?" I told her no, not exactly like this, but I had spent a career being the person in the room who did not fall apart, and that person did not disappear just because the patient this time was my own mother. It took 4 days for the full picture to come together, and each one revealed something worse than the last. The power of attorney document had been drafted by a lawyer Craig found through an online ad, not the family attorney my parents had used for decades, a man named Arthur Kessler who had drawn up their wills years earlier and who, when I called him, told me flatly that he had never been consulted about any new POA and would have refused to draft one that excluded me without a serious conversation first. The pharmacy records showed prescriptions for a sedative filled under my mother's name, but picked up, according to the pharmacist's log, by Denise on 3 separate occasions, using a note claiming she was authorized to collect on my mother's behalf. The memory care brochure, it turned out, was not something my parents had requested. An intake coordinator at the facility confirmed that Denise had called to schedule the tour herself, describing my mother as someone who sometimes forgets things and gets confused, building, piece by piece, a story that would make guardianship look not just reasonable, but necessary. I want to be clear about something, because it matters to how this story ends. I never once screamed. I never once called Craig a monster to his face, though God knows the word crossed my mind more than once in that hospital hallway. What I did instead was quieter, and I have come to believe far more effective. I called Arthur Kessler and asked him to meet me and my parents the following week to redraw their documents properly, this time with full transparency, and with both of their children informed, whether Craig liked it or not. I gathered every piece of paper, every printout, every statement from the pharmacist and the intake coordinator, and I organized it the way I used to organize a patient's chart, so that anyone reading it cold could understand exactly what had happened without a single wasted word. And I waited for Thanksgiving. My parents host Thanksgiving every year, out of habit and out of love for the tradition more than any real desire to cook for a crowd anymore. This year, I asked my mother if I could bring something a little different to the table, and she, understanding exactly what I meant without me having to explain it, agreed. Craig and Denise arrived that Thursday with a store-bought pie and the easy confidence of people who believed their secret was still safely buried. Denise complimented the tablecloth. Craig hugged my father a beat too long, the way people do when they are performing normalcy rather than feeling it. Dinner went the way Thanksgiving dinners go, at least at first. Turkey, too much stuffing, my father's terrible pun about cranberry sauce that he tells every single year. It was after the plates were cleared, while my mother was pouring coffee, that I set a folder down on the table, closed, unremarkable looking, the same manila color as the one that had once been wrapped in brown paper. Before dessert, I said, I think we should talk about something as a family. All of us. Craig's smile flickered, just barely, the way a light does right before it goes out entirely, that I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I opened the folder and, one page at a time, laid out what I had learned. The pharmacy records, the fraudulent power of attorney, the memory care tour scheduled without my mother's knowledge, the recording which I had transcribed but did not need to play aloud, because Craig's face when I mentioned it told everyone at that table everything they needed to know. Denise's composure cracked first. She insisted it had all been for their own good, that my parents were getting difficult to manage, that someone needed to step up since clearly I couldn't be bothered to. I let her finish. Then I said calmly, I was the one who drove Dad to his heart surgery. I was the one who found Mom's doctor. I was the one who sat in that hospital chair for 3 nights when Daniel was dying, and I never once asked either of you where you were. So you don't get to stand in my parents' dining room and tell me I wasn't bothered. My father, quiet through all of it, finally spoke, his voice steadier than I had heard it in weeks. Craig, he said, you're my son and I love you. But what you did to your mother is something I don't think I can forgive quickly. And I need you to understand that this isn't a misunderstanding we're going to smooth over with pie. For a long moment, nobody at that table spoke. My mother sat very still with her hands folded in her lap, the way she used to sit at the front of her classroom, waiting for a room full of second graders to settle. Craig's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he could not quite bring himself to say out loud. Finally, he tried one more angle. You don't understand what it's like managing all of this from 2 hours away, he said, and there was something almost pleading underneath the defensiveness now. I told him the same thing I'd tell any family member, I said. Distance doesn't excuse deception. If you were worried, you call me. You call a doctor. You don't put sedatives in your mother's tea. My mother reached over and placed her hand flat on the folder, as if to close the conversation herself. I raised you better than this, Craig, she said quietly, and it was the quiet that made it land harder than shouting ever could have. Craig left that table that evening. Denise left with him. Neither of them has spoken to me since, and my mother, for the first time in a long time, slept that night without anything foreign in her system. in a house that finally fully belonged to the people who were supposed to be protecting each other in the first place. The legal consequences came slowly but surely. Denise was charged with elder abuse and unauthorized possession of a controlled substance, and though the case is still working through the courts, the pharmacist's records and Detective Ibarra's investigation left little room for doubt. Craig was not criminally charged, since the evidence pointed to Denise as the one administering the medication. But the fraudulent power of attorney was voided in full by a judge who called the circumstances deeply troubling, and Craig was ordered to pay restitution for the legal fees my parents incurred undoing what had tried to put in place. My parents' new documents, properly drafted by Arthur Kessler, name both their children as informed parties, though only I hold decision-making authority now, a fact my mother insisted on herself, without me asking for it. My mother has her memory back, clear and sharp as it ever was, once the sedatives finally cleared her system completely. She jokes now, in the dry way she always has, that she is smarter than anyone gave her credit for, and she is right. It was her hands that wrapped that box. It was her voice on that recorder, speaking quietly into a phone in a locked bathroom because she could not find another way to be believed. She saved herself in the end, and she saved my father too. I only carried what she had already built. I think about that box often, sitting on my front step in the fading September light, tied with kitchen twine, looking for all the world like something ordinary. I think about how close I came to leaving it there until Sunday, to trusting the calendar instead of my instincts. I think about how many families never open the box in time. People sometimes ask me if I hate my brother now. I don't think hate is the right word. I think the right word is clarity. I loved the idea of him for a long time, the version of him that showed up in photographs and holiday cards, and I mistook that idea for the whole truth. Real love, I have learned, is not measured in who shows up for dessert. It is measured in who stays in the hospital chair, who answers the phone at 2 a.m, who reads the fine print before someone else signs it for you. I do not know if Craig and I will ever repair what broke that Thanksgiving. Some doors, once you see clearly what's on the other side of them, are not meant to be reopened carelessly. What I know for certain is this: quiet people don't explode. They clarify. And once you've learned to see the whole shape of a thing, the box, the twine, the silence underneath a mother's tired voice, you never go back to looking away again.